My mission is simple, to help you protect your family and keep more of your money. I'm here to help level the playing field for families and those who seek the truth. There's always a new way to make money, but at the end of the day, it's your family's security and your legacy that matter. And I promise to help you protect what's really important to you. Legacy Money starts now. Hello and welcome to Legacy Money, the show that shares the truth about money so you can live more, give more, and leave more. I'm Barry Page, your host, and I'm really excited today. My special guest, Dr. Paul Cleveland, is joining us. Paul is an author, educator, and economist. Paul, welcome to the program.
Well, it's great to be with you, Barry.
Paul, why don't you, I met you, and I'll just go ahead and share this through the Nelson Nash Institute at an infinite banking think tank many years ago, back when we were both a little younger there. You don't look to have changed a whole lot. And that's
I was
great.
a little thinner too.
Yeah, well, hey, that happens. That happens for sure as we get older. But why don't you tell us just a little bit about you, Paul? I'm going to dive into things a little deeper, but tell us a little bit about, just where you came from and what you're doing now.
Sure. So I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and went away to college at Auburn University. I graduated high school in 73, entered Auburn University fall of 73. Now, my brother was already down there, and he's spent his career as a pediatric heart surgeon. So that ought to tell you, he's the driven one. He's my older brother, the firstborn in the family. I'm the middle child. And while David was type A, I was sort of type D. I just was going to Auburn to have a good time. I thought every young man 18 to 22 deserved a 4-year paid vacation at parents' expense. I actually got into economics because I thought, well, this is like common sense. What's not to understand? Cost minimization. Economize. And so it's like I got it down. Supply and demand, prices moving, and so it came really easy to me. I tell students I don't recommend that path. It's better if you kind of know what you want to do. And I was good at economics, so got one degree, and thought I'd go out and work some. That didn't pan out, so I got back into grad school and got another degree. And I was thinking, well, now I got to go get a job. And my thesis chairman said, well, I could get you in at Texas A&M. So, yeah, why not? Let's give her a go. And so went out to College Station, Texas. Now, the program was really set up to be like 4 years and get your degree, writing your dissertation in that 4th year. I ended up switching topics and also committees. So it kind of put me behind, and I thought it would be crazy to leave, Texas and just be ABD. So I stayed another year to complete my dissertation and to get my degree, and it actually turned out pretty well because in that year I met my wife. So. And anyway, it's so funny. We got married and we went on a little honeymoon, came back to College Station, packed up everything we owned, and I haven't been back to College Station ever since. That's a long time. That was in 1985.
Wow.
So took my first position, State University of New York in Geneseo. We were there for 4 years. Beautiful part of the country. But then there's winter, and after the first one, I was like, "This isn't going to work out for me."
Right.
So I was basically looking for another position in a warmer climate for about 3 years.
Right.
Well, I found one, University of Central Florida in Orlando.
Right.
What's not to like about this? And so we moved to Orlando. And at the time, I thought we would stay. And it was during that time that I really was able to focus on what my career would look like.
Mm-hmm.
I had grown up in a Christian family, and so I came back to Christian faith actually at Texas A&M. And I had this question: how can I be an economist and a Christian? What does that look like? How can I approach this
Right.
from a Christian point of view? And I didn't really have the answer, but that year that we were in Orlando, they were opening Reformed Theological Seminary, and one of the scholars, R.C. Sproul, was a professor there, and he was teaching a history of Christian thought class. And Kathy was working at the college, and so I was able to audit that class. And Dr. Sproul was very kind, spent a lot of time with me, helped me out, put me in touch with people I really needed to know. Put me in touch with FEE, Foundation for Economic Education.
Right.
And so it was in that year that I got a vision for doing my work. Quite frankly,
Awesome.
one of the important books was Frederick Bastiat's The Law.
One of my favorites.
Yeah. And it was so funny how that happened. RC had given me a man's name who was really big into economics and a big funder of FEE. So he gave me his number. I called him, and Bob Love was so generous and so kind. And had a little chat, and he said, "Paul, you're still mired in that Keynesian stuff they taught you in the PhD program."
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I didn't think so. I thought I was a free marketer, but
Yes.
yeah,
Kind of dovetailing on that. Of course, what I do is I teach people about their personal economics, right?
right,
We all have our own personal economy. I was a business major, so
right.
marketing really. Now you sound like school came easy to you, and you say economics came easy to you. I remember when I took my whatever intro to econ 200 level class, I think it was. Really, the only thing I remember about the class is the professor, Farhang Niraman was his name, and he wrote up on the board, Tinstoffel, right?
Right.
There is no such thing as a free
Free
lunch.
lunch, yeah.
And I still share that with people because, really, that's what it kind of boils down to, right?
Right.
Uh, you know,
As a matter of fact, I would say that's the difference between a good economist and a very bad one.
right.
Is all economists up front will talk about opportunity costs, and there's no such thing as a free lunch. And then they find free lunches everywhere. I'm just like, well, how is this? So anyway, back Bob Love, I was talking to him, and he said, "Paul, can I send you some books?" I said, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." Well, I'm expecting maybe a little package with 2 or 3 books in it. And about a few days later, this UPS guy came in with a hand truck, this huge box of books, and so I set it on the couch, and I opened it up, and I'm sorting through these books, and I run across The Law, and me being the lazy guy that I am, I said, "Well, why
The
not read
smallest
this
book
one?"
in there, probably, huh? Right?
It's only like 85 pages.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is it. It's basically thou shalt not steal, you know, and
It's
certainly not
funny
steal
that
by government force.
you bring that up, and of course, being a Ten Commandment, and Nelson. Whenever you would see Nelson Nash live, he would talk about stealing,
Oh
and
yeah,
and he would always kind of preface it by saying, I might upset some people here, but that's what it is, right?
yeah.
And so I know you talk about it a lot in your writings and whatnot, about the 4 ways, right, to accumulate. So just quickly, if you don't mind, just sharing those 4 ways
Oh sure.
that
So
you could.
I always ask students, and I kind of go through it with them. If you want something, if you had to produce it yourself, starting with nothing, you would live very poorly, right? I mean, a ham sandwich. Oh, well, okay, let's see. First thing, I got to go forage for a wild pig out there somewhere and kill it and then cure it, right? I don't even know how to do a lot of these things.
My grandparents, lived on a farm, and they had a smokehouse, and that's what they did. And I don't
And
know, about
right.
your lineage there, but
Well, I
I didn't know how to
I
do
grew
it,
up
but
in
I knew they did.
Yeah, I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, that I was far away from that. But,
I wasn't far. I was in Newton, Mississippi, right on the Alabama line outside of Meridian there,
right.
and that's where they had their farm. But yeah,
So, but
so the
that's
meat, you got the pork. So now the
right.
bread.
And so then I get to the second way. So there's only 2 ways to get what you want. It's production and trade, right? You can trade for it. And that's the way we go through life. We produce and we trade. We produce, and the way we produce, a lot of our first income is selling our labor services to an employer who's agreed to pay us a particular wage rate for our labor services. And so and people get money wrong. The money involved is just the medium of exchange. It's just the way we accomplish a trade because then we don't have to barter. And it makes life easier. We can make all sorts of different trades to our great advantage, and people begin to take it for granted that it's always going to work that way.
Right.
Well, there's only 2 other ways, and the first labor saving device, you can steal it, take it from somebody else by force or fraud, or somebody could give it to you. Now, neither one of those will work economically because both of them presuppose prior production. Nobody can steal what hadn't been produced, and nobody can give away something they haven't produced, right? So it just won't work. So this is where Bastiat comes in. He says, well, if the government takes it from you and gives it to somebody else, that's just legalized theft.
Yeah.
And that's why all socialism fails. It fails miserably and it fails economically because it's not economics. It's a system of theft where the thieves can act with impunity. That is, nobody's coming after them, nobody's locking them up, putting them in jail. As a matter of fact, what has happened is, Washington, D.C. has become more or less a mob institution where the average guy is imposed upon right and left with taxes and forced to provide stuff that they didn't want to be involved in, and it's a mess, and it's not working, quite frankly.
Legalized plunder.
Yeah, it won't work. And we went down this road. That's what was wrong with Hamilton and the Republicans. You know, uh, a protectionist tariff raises the price for the people who have to now pay the higher prices for the products and provides a special interest for a few businesses. But that's not general welfare.
Right.
That's that's a special privilege that not everybody enjoys, and that's our government was never designed to do that. And people don't understand that one, and so that's where we first started to go down the line. We got further into it with the progressive movement, and our first basically the progressive movement was the socialist movement in America. They didn't want to call it socialism because it wouldn't sell. But who could be against progress? And so that's why they called it the progressive movement. When they did that, they got a guy elected, Woodrow Wilson, and we're off the races, heading down a path from that point forward where we're, heading downhill.
And the fourth way,
Yeah, charity.
charity.
Charity is a great thing, but once again, I've got to be able producing something. And if I want to be charitable, I can't consume it all,
Right.
right? And then I have to make a decision to give it to somebody else. And we make these decisions all the time, whether it's recognizing our standing before the Lord and that He wants us to trust Him. Well, one of the biggest ways to show we trust Him is by giving a tenth of what we produce to Him, to His cause, right?
Right.
And then He goes, "Yeah, I like you trusting me." I'm going to take care of you. And then you got to be clever, you got to be wise, right? Because there's there's the thieves out there,
Sure.
and you got to avoid the thieves. And one of the biggest avoidances is your own government.
Right.
They don't want you to succeed. they
No.
don't they don't care whether you succeed or not. In fact, they prefer you to be dependent upon them,
Right.
and they use fear a lot to accomplish that end.
Fear, definitely a big tactic. And so you've been a professor of economics for over 30 years, right?
Yeah, total professorship, 39 years. And then, of course, teaching, I taught as an instructor for about 3 years when I was in College Station at Blinn Junior College. So teaching experience, yeah, like 42 years or
Wow.
so. And then I had class. I would teach one class a semester as a grad student. So
And you've spoken all over the world at different
yeah,
universities.
yeah.
And
Um,
and I think that's what first, when I first met you at the think tank and heard you speak, I was just, man, blown away. You've got a great way of, sharing your message and, you just kind of lay the facts out there. But you were just talking about government, and I was reading one of your stories. I'll share it for just a
okay.
minute in
Sure.
just a minute because I want to get into it. But you were talking about too much law, right? And
Right.
how the government has just gotten completely out of hand. And of
Yeah.
course, I think people are, I don't know, it's like they've been asleep and not paying attention to what's going on for so long. And of course, the Bible talks to us about Christians, being asleep. They have to wake up, and because reality is here. It's facing us.
It is facing us. And a friend of mine, we get together and we talk about these things. And we've come up with a slogan for it. We call it "Rules Gone Wild."
There you go.
I mean, think about Washington D.C. They got thousands of regs. You can't even know 'em.
Right, right.
So how do you know you're complying with all their regs? Well, you can't live that way, so nobody does. And
Yes.
as a result, then their regs are just used politically to go after whomever,
Right.
and it doesn't matter to them.
Sure.
Um,
So I've heard you refer to yourself as and we're touching on it with the government stuff, but I've heard you refer to yourself as a political economist. And I
right,
just wanted to read this quote from the Austrian right down the road from you there at Auburn. And it's from Friedrich Hayek. It said, "Nobody can be a great economist who is only an economist." And I'm even tempted to add that the economist who is only an economist is likely to become a nuisance, if not a positive danger. And so I know you taught finance, you speak a lot about banking and monetary policy.
right.
So tell us a little bit about this political economist and does that give you fear? You were just talking about the fear is how the government enforces these laws. So talk to us a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
So I mean, back in 1989, 1990, when I got a clear vision of what I wanted to do, I knew it was going to cover at least four areas of study, and that would be kind of economics proper, if you will,
Mhm.
history. If you don't know history, uh, you know, you can be led down so many bad roads, and so history is really important. I think philosophy is another area of importance because every uh, method of study is going to assume some undergirding philosophy for how it will be pursued. And if you don't know what it is, you can make some say some really silly stuff. And then I would add to that uh, theology, the study of God. if God has created this universe, then he created it with particular order. And so if you want to know about something in the natural order, you want to make sure your approach is not inconsistent with a good theology. That is, in other words, God will never violate his own character, right? He'll never violate his attributes because he doesn't change. He's not going to change for you. He's asking you to change for him.
Right. Right.
Right? I mean, and the only way you're going to change for him is by recognizing you can't do it. You know? And that's where the gospel of grace is, that Jesus paid the price. And if he's paid the price, I can have a relationship with him. I can have salvation. And I can have the Holy Spirit living in me. And while I might not be perfect and far from it, I've got a target now, right? And I don't have to care whether I hit it perfectly or not, because that's been taken care of. And so for me, I've got to have a good theology, you know, and that ought to, and the philosophy then has to be consistent with that theology, or if it's not, I need to jettison that. And then understanding things in light of history then will help me understand issues of economics. They're really, in terms of economic principles, there are some really important ones to get. You really need to understand money to get it right. You need to understand some things about finance. You need to understand some things about money prices and how they're arrived at. And so the economic principles then come out on their own, and then you can kind of grapple with them and see really what's going on.
Following that a little bit, you have a chapter in your book, Unmasking the Sacred Lies, on money, monetary theory, money banking, and the development of that policy. And I like how you tied the theology into pretty much every time I've heard you talk. You're not afraid to speak about God's grace and Jesus Christ. Why do you think, and you mentioned if you're going to study, economy, you kind of have to understand history and that. So why do you think so many, I don't know, economists or even politicians for that matter, for sure, avoid that, right?
They do. Well, in grad school, just come straightforward. So my fields of specialty, things I studied most deeply, were finance was one. Okay.
Right.
The other two were econometrics, basically statistics for economists.
Right.
And mathematical economics.
Wow.
Well, it looks, and here's another Hayek thing, it looks really scientific. But as I began to do my work, I've discovered that's the least scientific way to approach the subject. Because people are not machines.
Right.
And so to think of us as machinery that we can conceptualize by a mathematical formula that your choices are made that way, that's really kind of silly when you get right down to it. You don't make choices that way. Neither do I.
Right.
And so, that's one of the things that kind of took me back. Hayek referred to it as scientism.
Right.
And I think he was quite right. And then, the thing about it is that with Keynes' introduction of macroeconomics and that we can spend our way to prosperity. Talk about the insane asylum gone wild.
Right.
And I think the attraction for a lot of economists was, oh, I spent those 4 years learning all this math. I better use it
Sure.
because I don't know any different.
Yeah. Okay, if you don't mind elaborating a little on Keynesian economics, 'cause I don't think most people even quite understand, who John Maynard Keynes was, or how
Okay. Yeah.
what we practice in our country. Just for the average person out there that might be watching this, that's learned a little bit about money and banking, and they hear macroeconomics and microeconomics, and of course I like to talk about personal economics, but give
Right.
people the big picture of what we do, our economy, and our government. And
Okay.
Keynesian.
Well, Keynes tried to argue, and he used a really what I'd call a circular flow of reasoning to get here, that you could get stuck in a depression
Mm-hmm.
because there's not enough spending on
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that historically, the early economists uh, had ditched that, and they
Right.
run all over that, especially Jean Baptiste Say. His treatise on political economy just skewered that totally. And so, what Keynesian economics is trying to do is jettison Say's work. And what Keynes is trying to argue is that prodigality is a virtue. Now, how much this is tied to who Keynes was, he was an elitist, he was arrogant. At university, he joined a little group, they called themselves the Apostles, and they thumbed their nose at bourgeois values, that is, Christian values.
Right.
And so what's one of the main Christian values in economics? Isn't it to be thrifty and frugal and economize, right?
Yeah.
And to make best use of your time and resources. I
Right.
mean, that's fundamental Christianity.
Sure.
And so Keynes was turning that on its head. And he was trying to say, no, savings is a problem because you're going to make the economy get stuck in a recession. Well, he didn't understand a darn thing about what savings are actually all about. When I use the word saving, what I mean is I'm postponing consumption from the present to the future for a reason.
Sure.
And the only way that that's going to help me is if it's invested in something that is itself productive and that can grow at a particular, at some rate. And depending on the level of risk I'm willing to take. Well, and without those funds to invest in capital, that is all the things we utilize to produce other things, we cannot have a complex economy. It doesn't exist. So with Keynes, what the government has done is they're attacking savers in our economy.
Yes.
And so they attack our savers in many ways. One, through taxation, but one, through inflation. It's the easiest way to tax you. And so they created the Federal Reserve the law was passed in 1913. The institution got started early the next year, 1914. But I mean, this is a malicious institution. It's a counterfeiter,
Right.
and you'll get a kick out of this. Thomas Sowell was being interviewed, and the interviewer was reading his book. He said, "So you would say we should abolish the Fed?" And Thomas says, "Oh, absolutely." And the interviewer he's just taken aback. He goes, well, what would we replace it with?
Right.
And Sol's response was, "Well, when you cut out a cancer, you don't ask what you're going to replace."
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and I'll just looked up some numbers here this is from the Federal Reserve's own numbers.
Okay.
So the monetary base stands today at $5.7 trillion. Oh, by the way, that was uh, down a little bit from its all-time peak, which was about 6.04 trillion. Now, back before the '08 collapse, the monetary base was about $850 billion.
Yeah.
So there's
Hockey
been a lot
stick.
of yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of printing of the money
Right.
in that time. Now that monetary base is referred to as high-powered money because with a 10% reserve requirement, that increase, whatever the increase was, could create credit money tenfold.
Right. 50 trillion.
Now, it hadn't happened like that. It hadn't happened like that because there's a lot of excess reserves in the system.
Right. A lot of
Highest,
credit out there, though, right? A lot of credit, a lot of money in retirement accounts, for instance, right?
yeah. Reserves in the depository institutions.
Correct. Right.
The high water mark was $4.12 trillion. Uh, Currently, it's at 3.3 trillion. All right, so that high would have been during the COVID years, just
Mhm.
recently.
Mhm.
Okay, prior to COVID, it stood at 1.5 trillion.
Mm.
And the peak during quantitative easing, this was Bernanke, it was at 2.8 trillion. So it had gone to 2.8 trillion. After Bernanke, the banks were drawing it down some, and I think plus the Fed ended quantitative easing during that time, and they were trying to lower their own balance sheet for a while there. But then
Mhm.
COVID came along and was, you know, let's throw throw the hammer down.
Right.
So government interest payments right now are at $1.06 trillion every
Trillion
year.
dollars.
Just interest on the
Yeah.
debt.
Just interest on the debt. Some eh,
Before you have program number one,
exactly.
exactly. Total spending, they're at 6.7 trillion annually.
And what's the tax revenue? About 4 trillion, 4 to
Now
5 trillion.
3.03 trillion right
Yeah.
now.
Which is down because it's been up to
Because
4.
yeah, I mean
Yeah.
we're basically heading for the cliff, and
Right. Exactly.
so and people are not paying attention. Well, that price controls or taxing the rich or any of that stuff can help us is lunacy. It's just
Right.
lunacy. The only thing that's going to help is cutting government spending.
Exactly. And they seem to have such a hard time doing that.
Yeah, I mean
I always say, politicians love to make promises they don't have to keep, right?
yeah, oh yeah,
And so to get elected, they make all these promises. But you just touched on something that I have to ask about.
yeah.
You, especially being an educator, a professor, right? So, what do you think has happened? That first of all, you said economics came natural to you, but when
Right.
I talk to the average family that I don't know 40s to 50s, and then if I talk to like I just had some clients in earlier today that her parents, she was in the 70s, she was 40, and her parents were in their 70s, and they economics. What I mean, what is it? The Federal Reserve came. I mean, what has happened? Why do you think people? They don't even know what the Federal Reserve is, other than they see them coming on TV once a week to
Right.
talk about lowering
Controlling,
rates, and they think that's the problem. They
yeah.
think if the Fed would just lower rates, that the economy would be better. Why do you think people are so uneducated and not willing, I guess, to really learn What's going on with their money?
Yeah, well, I guess the issue, I mean, if Harris can come out and say, well, we need to have price gouging laws, which is
Right.
really nothing more than price controls.
Sure.
The Fed lowering the interest rate through its monetary policy is really nothing other than a price ceiling on interest rates, right?
Hmm.
And so that's going to create a shortage in savings that is only made up for by printed up dollars. That paper is not real wealth in any way, shape, or form. It only become money only and investments only really pay off over time. But if I'm producing a product, if the people I want to sell to are not economically viably able to purchase the product, I might not be able to sell it at a profit. I might take a loss.
Right.
And so that's all that the Federal Reserve is doing. They're trying to induce people to save even less. And most people don't save anything anymore, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, that's why the IBC approach is so great because
Yeah.
it gets you out of that trap.
Yes.
It
Yes.
just gets you out of that trap,
Right.
and it puts you on a long-term trajectory of being able to build actual wealth.
Right.
So for my own little business, it would not have been possible without IBC, right? Because I borrow against the cash value of my policies. If I need to print a book up, lend it to the business. Business pays it off at interest. I write the interest off on my taxes, and um, you know, uh, I pay the loan back off. And so I cannot inflate that.
Right.
I think that was Nelson's one of his biggest points. You cannot inflate that
Right.
because it's set up to grow consistently, right?
Right.
Because it's been engineered that way.
Exactly.
And and so the thing is, I'm only limited by the amount of funds that I have available to invest in stock.
Right.
And I just one little sidebar. I've never done. I'm kind of risk averse, but one of my friends in academia uh, sent me a thing about a startup company that needed capital,
Hmm.
and and so he told me what he was going to do, and I thought, oh, that sounds like that could be a good business, So I talked to the guys launching it. So I ended up borrowing $10,000, and I bought $10,000 worth of introductory shares. I got 50,000 shares in this company.
Right.
They were only 25 cents a share. I think.
Right.
But but if the company goes great, fine. And then if it doesn't, okay, I might be out $10,000. But I could do it, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it was like, man, why not? I've never taken a risk like this before. And if it pans out, those 50,000 shares could end up being worth a whole lot more if and when this company goes public.
Hmm.
So um, and the other thing, I'm kind of out of stock market right now because I think it's really overvalued.
Hmm. Hmm.
If the recheck comes,
Right.
there, what will happen is typically what happens is prices of stocks drop below their economic value, even
Hmm.
while they're above the economic value right now. And so I could see myself, borrowing against cash value and buying stock at that point. But
Right.
I'm not going to do it right away, of
Yeah.
course.
Well, you're talking my language now a little bit. You're talking about business and entrepreneurship, and I want to segue into that a little bit with you. But I had a similar instance where I invested. I had saved, which was a lot of money to me at the time. I had saved $16,000 as a college student. Um, I was selling books and Bibles door to door in college, and I'd saved quite some money. Now, my roommate at the time, who had also sold books, became a stockbroker. And of course, there was this big company you may have heard of in Mississippi at the time. They were going up against AT&T, the large long distance. Kids don't even know anything about long distance today, but MCI WorldCom. And so I said, well, hey, they're from Mississippi, and I've got this money saved. And he said, yeah, that stock, it was, I think, about $16. So I'm just going to go up to 45 and maybe 75. And so I put that whole 16 grand in there, right? And it went up to 25. And man, I thought, yeah, I'm making money. And what do you think happened after that? It never made it to 45 or 75. I got absolutely zero for my investment. It went to nothing. And so I learned my lesson real quick about that. But along about that time, I had already got the entrepreneurship bug. I started throwing newspapers when I was about 10 years old. And then, I sold the books, and that just really changed it. So I've never really had a job, right? My only job has been on commission. And so I pretty much have worked for myself 1099 my entire life. And I know now you just brought it up. You borrowed money from your IBC, your infinite banking concept life insurance policy, and you used it to publish, many books that you published. But now you have an entire curriculum, and I'm just going to show this boundary stone.
Yeah.
And you're a publisher now. Is that correct, Paul?
Yeah, that's correct. And, it's interesting how I got into this because Nelson introduced me to another mentor, Clarence Carson.
Right.
Nelson was on his board of directors, and he invited me to go to a board meeting. And before you knew it, I'm on. I knew of Clarence's work, and because he was involved with fee as well.
Right.
And I highly valued it. So when Nelson said, would you like to go? I said, oh, and I jumped at the chance. So in getting to know Clarence, he was writing, books for high schoolers and entry-level college students in American history, economics, and government. The government book was really the last one he did. But he wanted to do a Western Civ book. And so I was there. And I knew I wanted to do some history studies. So I said, well, why don't I do it? And other board members agreed. I didn't vote on that one. And so I set out to write this book. And Clarence was very, he would read through my manuscripts and make suggestions of, other things I might include and that sort of thing. Well, about the time I thought this little group would publish it at the end of the day. Clarence came to me and said, I'd finished the manuscript. It was around 2001, 2002, somewhere in there. And Clarence said, Paul, I think you need to find another publisher. Well, I've got several years invested in the research and the writing of this thing. And with, I don't know, my wife has MS, and so we're going through some counseling issues as well with that. And my counselor said, well, Paul, why don't you publish it? And it was like, well, yeah, well, why not? I mean, that's what Clarence has been doing.
Right.
And so I didn't try to set up a 501(c)(3), I just set it up as a, just an LLC, and I published that book and borrowed the money to do it.
Right.
And now God's good to the naive. I mean, book business is a little harder than this.
Yes.
But I actually broke even on that book in the first 6 months.
Oh, wow.
and so paid off all our, I'm like, and you know, now we haven't had to reprint, but you know, but we have done okay with it, and I guess
Right.
occasionally we'll still sell one here or there.
Right.
Um, but anyway, so that's how I got started, and then the reason Clarence had done that is he had lost his biggest reseller of his books
Mm.
through a merger. In addition, he knew his health was failing because he passed away in 2003. So, and that was the year we published the book. And my only regret is I didn't have a physical copy in hand to hand to him at the hospital when Nelson and I went down there to visit before he died.
Mm. Mm.
Um, now, of course, it's dedicated to Clarence, of course, and I gave copies at Clarence's funeral to his wife Murtis, and now she passed away not too long afterwards. I think it was around 2005, and so that just left his two daughters, and one daughter and her husband were her husband Mike was on the board as well, and so Mike kind of took over the business, but uh, they ended up moving out to California, and he didn't want to deal with it, and neither did Evelyn. And his economics book, I thought it was really well done, but it was out of date. It really needed some revisions. So I went to Mike and Evelyn and just asked them if they let me just take that book over and redo that,
Mhm.
um, and just give them royalties. They were like, "Sure, perfect." So, um, so right now, Evelyn and her sister Melissa have signed over to me all the um, production rights and copyrights to all those books,
Wow.
and I they don't have to do anything. I pay them royalties at the end of
Right.
the year. So the bigger the business I can grow it,
Right.
the bigger the check I'll cut for each of them at the end of the year,
Sure. Sure.
and I think they like
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's a great story, and I had no idea. Of course, I have a little bit of experience in the publishing industry. I tell people today when they ask me what you do, I tell them I sell books. I sell this book
Uh,
right here. I don't make any money really on that, but that's what I did in college. And of course, when I was selling those books and Bibles, I was working for Thomas Nelson Publishers. They were the largest Bible publisher in the world at the time, and they still are. They've merged with some other companies, but they they also published a lot of self help books. So I was blessed enough to see people like Zig Ziglar and
right.
Dennis Waitley and a lot of great authors at a young age. But you've taken another kind of course. You're using your background as a teacher,
Mhm.
professor, and this boundary stone, there's a wealth of knowledge there. I was not really even aware until I
Yeah.
started digging into it. But I was looking at you. You teach courses. You've got online courses.
Right.
You've got curriculums. Basically homeschool and all sorts of things, resources for teachers and just
Oh,
the
sure.
public out there. But can you just a little bit of
Yeah.
how you would
So
like to see that used and what your goals are, looking down the road with that.
so the first thing that we've done is we had homeschooled our children, and
Right.
both I as well as my wife taught economics and government to homeschoolers
Okay.
using these books.
Right.
So in doing that, now Kathy is a little more organized and thinking about high school curriculum.
Right.
And me putting together a syllabus for a semester is quite a little bit different.
Sure.
So um, anyway, taking her kind of plan for a semester of economics,
Hmm.
we went ahead and built out an online course to pair with our book.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of built in, and there are quizzes that you take at certain points, and there are exams that you take, and they're scored in the within the program, and what you have to read on particular days, and links to videos and all this sort of stuff that are relevant to whatever the topic is. And so we have those courses for both government as well as economics. I'm currently working on trying on the American history. It exists right now as a 6 paperback volume set. What we would like to do is, and we're not quite sure how this is going to turn out yet, but we've taken the first 3 volumes and we've edited it to and updated a few things in it. We wanted it to read really well for the high school students. So I enlisted my son, who was actually teaching in high school for a while, to help begin that process and to make some suggestions. So we've got the manuscript for the first volume of that finished. We don't have the online course done. So I've been working on trying to work on that a little bit. And then I've got some general interest books, the one you mentioned, Unmasking the Sacred Lies. If I put a subtitle, it would be The Growth of Government, our Economic Policy in America, or How Did We Get in This Mess? So,
Yes.
and so I just go area by area, and I begin with the big pictures, fiscal policy, and then monetary policy, and then we have different areas: transportation, agriculture, all the other sort of stuff.
Right.
In the other book, we did this not too long ago, and we haven't done really well with it for whatever reason. Well, we broke even on it, but I got to pay to store them, and we're not really
Right.
selling a whole lot of them.
Yeah.
But I'm understanding the culture wars.
Sure.
Actually, I think our title is The Great Utopian Delusion.
Hmm. Let's
It's
talk
what's
about
going
that.
on out there,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't know. Maybe people like utopia.
Yeah, well,
Think
that was
they're
the
going to
next
get
question I
there.
was going to ask you is what kind of roadblocks or stumbles you've had, now going from being a professor for 30, 40 years to now with your business, being a publisher. Because I know living in Nashville is where I moved to work for Thomas Nelson. I
Right.
started another business there, and I went into publishing. We were publishing videos, but I quickly found out Nashville, one, is kind of the center of publishing in our country. Most people don't know it. The printing publishing industry, that's what they're known for there in
Yeah.
Nashville. Uh, a lot of music, obviously, Christian publishers.
Right.
But I ran into a lot of roadblocks because, well, first it was easy to get access to printers and publishers and photographers and studios, but it was hard because I was competing against all the major publishers, and here I was,
Right.
this little guy. So, what have you ran into, and how have you overcome these challenges?
That's a good question. I'm not sure we've actually overcome all those challenges. While your background is in marketing,
Yes.
mine's not.
Yes.
That's been the thing that we've tried to focus on intentionally in the last few years, and we still don't have it all
Yeah.
understood. But we're trying to make some moves to think uh, about getting our name out there
Hmm.
because we think if people find us,
Hmm.
they're going to be happy they found us.
Right.
And because, quite frankly, I don't see anyone out there with better content than what we have. And I've always been, let me focus on the content first. That
Right.
I wanted anything that I wrote to be truthful and accurate. Not
Right.
always gotten there, but yeah, at least, when I find something that's wrong, and I will go back and fix it when I can.
Sure.
Um, but you kind of
Learn as you
go
go.
for, yeah, that's been our situation, and I wasn't as serious about growing it for quite a while. Around 2010, we had a pretty good year in 2010 because I was hired to do some curriculum work for other institutions, and so all that money would all run through the business, you
Sure.
know, our speaking honorarium into the business. Still would do that, and so all of that goes through the business. If I write something that I get paid uh, to publish it, they're going to pay me to publish it. That'll just go through the business, and so a lot of little things like that over time. And in around 2010, we got serious, more serious, I think, around about 5 years, 6 years ago. But we've kind of plateaued. So I don't know where we're going to end up. We're in our big sales time, of course, right now.
Right.
We'll see where we end up this year.
Sure. Well, if anything, I just want to offer you some words of encouragement there because, again, 40 years self employed myself and being in that space somewhat, but you produce content, Paul. You're a speaker, you're an author, you've written books, you have this blog here. I've got up on the screen there. The lawlessness of too many laws is, I guess, a current one blog that you
Right.
have. Just keep creating that content, and it's like build it and they will come.
Yeah.
But I also want to encourage you to do exactly what Nelson said. The first rule of IBC. Do you remember what that is?
Don't steal the peas.
No, that's the
One,
that's the
uh,
that's the third rule. The
third
first one
rule.
is think long term, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you've
Well,
got
that's
to
true.
have something. And I deal with business owners on a daily basis, and very few of them think about that. Maybe these guys in tech they think about selling their business, but of course that's an option, right? The trade
Yeah.
that you talk about, but will it be your family that takes it over? Will you sell it? Will it go out of business? And again, that's maybe why the life insurance companies are still around. They're looking 100 years down the road, right?
Right.
The companies we deal with are, a couple centuries old. So keep writing, keep producing, but start thinking about that exit strategy, that succession plan. But right now,
Well,
you're
yeah.
at the peak, right? Our colleague that you may remember, Dwayne Burnell, talked about going in those final innings, right? That third and fourth quarter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
living
That's
in
right.
Nashville, Jack Massey, I'll say all of these businessmen that didn't even get started. Ray Kroc. And how did Walt Disney get their business started? Right? They used what we're talking about here, the
Yeah.
banking that was available through their life insurance policy. So you're there, you're doing it, and keep your chin up because I think it can only grow if you ask me.
Well, I think a big boost for us was COVID because parents began to see what their kids were really being taught.
Absolutely, they and
That's absolute garbage.
it is garbage. And yeah, I was blessed enough to work with a lot of college kids that went to Pensacola Christian College, and I run into homeschoolers out there working door to door, which there were few and far between back then in the 80s and 90s. But now, homeschooling is kind of come in its own. A lot of people they refuse to send their kids to public schools. They either want to go to private schools or to homeschool, and so that's what you're offering.
That's what we're doing
Yeah,
is
yeah,
actual curriculum
yeah.
and solid stuff and stuff that's user friendly
Right.
and very affordable.
Sure.
So I mean, I think we're doing all those things that's going to be user friendly, affordable, take the fear out of mama not knowing, American government or not knowing economics or not knowing all the details about American history. We're taking the fear out of that. And in fact, they could learn something, they can get as involved in it as they want, or just kind of monitor, so it's their choice of how they want to do it, but they can feel even if they're just monitoring it, they'll know that their student is getting a solid education. That's our goal.
That's awesome. So boundarystone.org is the website.
Yeah.
And if people want to learn more about that or possibly transition into homeschooling, they can learn all about it there.
Come see us.
Well, thank you so much,
Okay,
Paul,
Barry. Thank you for having
joining
me.
us today.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add in
No,
closing?
maybe we can do it again sometime and talk about something else,
Absolutely. Maybe get a little more into the money and banking side of it. But thank you so much. Thank all of you out there for joining us today. We appreciate your time. And if you haven't already, go ahead and maybe subscribe to our channel. That's Legacy Money. Well, thank you so much. And have a great day. Appreciate you joining us.
Okay, you too, Barry.
Take care.
Okay.